We're going to talk about some really interesting fantasy football rest of season questions today. Going to post some players to you guys. You'll pick one or the other. I'll give some information on what the general consensus is on these guys. Let's get started right away. On Twitter, I put out multiple polls throughout the day asking who would you rather have for the rest of the season? And it was running backs and it was wide receivers on the same team. Just to get an idea of how people viewed these guys when we do our rankings, how we view them is differently sometimes than when people set their lineups. So I'll start off with the Cincinnati Bengals. I said, which wide receiver would you rather have, Tyler Boyd or T. Higgins? And this one surprised me a little bit because it's been Tyler Boyd for the entire season with in terms of being ranked higher as the better wide receiver. But 65.4% of the Brainiacs that answered said T. Higgins over Tyler Boyd. Does that surprise either of you?
That does surprise me. I can understand where the take is coming from. T. Higgins, for anybody who's not aware of this stat, which this was a crazy stat to me, is the only wide receiver to have 60 or more receiving yards the last 6 games. Longest active streak in the NFL among wide receivers. That's more than Devontae Adams, more than DeAndre Hopkins has had consistently over the last 6 weeks. So that's obviously very promising. Tyler Boyd, though, I just still don't see how you can put T. Higgins over Tyler Boyd because Tyler Boyd has not been bad. You're looking at the last 4 weeks for Tyler Boyd, 12.9, 27.7, 19.6, and 10.1 points. He has only had 2 games this entire season with less than double-digit points. He's had 3 games with over 20 points. I just don't see how you can't pick Tyler Boyd. Again, both are wide receiver 2s, probably the rest of the
The answer is recency bias. That's why currently Tyler Boyd is looking like the worse option than T. Higgins. Recently, T. Higgins has been more consistent. I'm kind of falling victim to that too. I'm pretty sure I voted T. Higgins on that poll because I think right now they're pretty neck and neck, even guys in terms
Absolutely,
of
they're
value.
neck and neck.
It's exactly. It's like these 2 guys pretty interchangeable. They're both favorite targets of Joe Burrow. AJ Green's starting to fade out a little bit again of that offense. He was back for a quick second, and then suddenly he was gone again. And T. Higgins, keeper league-wise, dynasty league-wise, obviously the better guy there than Tyler Boyd, because Tyler Boyd is 26 years old, where T. Higgins is a rookie this year. T. Higgins still has more potential. Looking at pure target numbers, though, Tyler Boyd does have more targets this year than T. Higgins by a margin, a pretty decent margin. Tyler Boyd has 76 targets. T. Higgins has 61. If you look at pure receptions, T. Higgins is 40 this year. Tyler Boyd is 60. So Tyler Boyd has more volume, but that was a lot in part due to the beginning of the season. So it's evened out a lot since then. I still think Tyler Boyd probably is the better option, but it's so close.
You look at their red zone targets, T. Higgins has 7 and Tyler Boyd has 9. So again, very comparable numbers for the two. A lot of people, their trade deadlines have passed, but there are some people out there who are still able to trade heading into the playoffs. If you were looking to acquire one of these two, would it be T. Higgins? And if it is, what would you be willing to give up to get him? Because he's played like a high-end wide receiver too the past month.
It probably would be T. Higgins just because chances are he's going to be cheaper. And what I'll give up, I mean, it depends on what your team needs, obviously. I'd probably give up Clyde for Higgins straight up, especially if you need wide receivers. I don't even know if that's a hot take. I think you guys would agree.
If I'm a T. Higgins owner, I own T. Higgins in one of my leagues, there's no chance I'm taking Clyde Edwards-Helaire at this point in time for T. Higgins. T. Higgins is so much more valuable.
I'm the same way. I don't know. I think if you're looking to trade for Higgins, that's a guy that you should throw in if you're trying to maybe try and make a bigger trade and be like, oh, hey, if I'm going to give you all this, I'd also want T. Higgins as kind of a throw-in and see if you can kind of sneak him off that way. Because again, T. Higgins, the name, still doesn't have much value.
If you're looking straight up 1-for-1, I'm going to look out of the running back position because you probably shouldn't do a whole lot of trades 1-for-1 wide receiver position unless it'll be an interesting type of trade then. But let's look at the running back position. Guys I would give up for T. Higgins at this point, probably like an Antonio Gibson, especially as he fades out of that offense. A Ronald Jones, selling high on him after he had a huge game last week, and now he's going to continue to split carries with Leonard Fournette. Those are the kinds of guys right now that I would sell for T. Higgins, and I think I could probably get T. Higgins value for.
I was thankful enough to trade David Johnson straight up for T. Higgins before Johnson went on the IR. He was questionable. He had the concussion, but he hadn't gone on the IR, and I couldn't be more thankful for the person that sent that trade to me. I love T. Higgins. I think he's a fantastic wide receiver to play for the rest of the season. All right, moving on now to the next question that I asked. This was a running back one. Which running back would you rather have for the rest of the season? Kenyon Drake or Chase Edmonds? And I thought this one was really, really interesting because Kenyon Drake was leading for quite a bit. And then all of a sudden, I guess Chase Edmonds owners took over here, and he ended up winning this poll 53.7% to 46.3%. So people would rather have Edmonds, and I don't think I can blame them. I think in PPR, Edmonds is the better pick rest of the season. We've seen Drake get some opportunities with the ball in the passing game. He's dropped a few, and the other balls just haven't gone his way. When you look at their red zone rushing attempts, Drake hardly gets those because Kyler Murray is vulturing the touchdowns. Chase Edmonds has had a few receiving touchdowns. So I think Edmonds is the play rest of the season, but what do you guys think?
I can't say I disagree with that in PPR. They're close. The big thing in PPR, I should say in standard, I think the answer is pretty obviously Kenyon Drake. But in PPR, Chase, and even probably in half PPR, though in half, probably still Drake in half PPR. I'm not completely sure there because Edmonds isn't getting as many receptions as I'd like for half PPR. But in PPR, I mean, if he consistently gets 3 receptions a game and he consistently gets 5 to 10 carries a game, the production that he's had off of that is good enough to sustain low-end RB2 value. And if he happens to fall in the end zone, you're starting to look more mid-tier to high-end RB2. Kenyon Drake, on the other hand, he's just not getting in the end zone because Kyler Murray is vulturing every single rushing touchdown there is to be had. So that's why I like Chase Edmonds a little bit more. They're still pretty close.
I'm more on the Kenyon Drake side of this. Just to mix it up a little bit, I'll go with Kenyon Drake here. He's been pretty good with his carries. I know at the start of the season he wasn't, but against Buffalo, he definitely was. He had 16 carries for 100 yards. He broke off a 20-yard carry. He had 1 catch for 9 yards, so nothing great there. He did fumble, which hurt his stat line a little bit. But overall, I mean, that's a solid day for Kenyon Drake. He'll take 100 yards if he gets in the end zone, which I know it seems unlikely at this point. He's only gotten in the end zone 4 times this year, which wasn't what you were expecting. You were expecting a little bit more out of him when you drafted him, end zone wise, touchdown wise. But at this point, I'm kind of thinking that Kenyon Drake, with that volume, 16 carries a game, he's gotten double-digit carries in every single game that he's played. I'm okay with throwing him in there in my starting lineup and thinking that he could break off for 100 yards like he has in the past. He's a solid rusher still. It's not like his matchups are necessarily hard. And while I get the Chase Edmonds argument, he's got some more value in PPR as well. I still think Kenyon Drake's the bell cow there, which he is. He's proven that he is. And while Chase Edmonds was shipping carries.
He didn't prove it last week. He had 16 rush attempts to Chase Edmonds, 8 rush attempts to Kyler Murray's, probably right around 10 rush attempts. I don't have those numbers pulled up, but that's probably what he had. He's not the bell cow back. He's the main running back, but Edmonds and Murray are still getting as many combined rush attempts as Kenyon Drake is getting, if not more, week in and week out. So you can't sit here and say that he's the bell cow because he's not. He's not getting in the end zone, and he's not getting receptions. And in PPR, that's not going to cut it because if he has 15 carries a game, let's say he has 1 reception a game, chances are week in and week out, let's say 4 yards per carry, which is about standard. That's 60 yards on the ground, 1 reception for 10 yards. You're looking at an 8-point game. And I think that's a solid expectation for Kenyon Drake week in and week out.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I just like Kenyon Drake's floor. And with Chase Edmonds, I'm not sure he has a floor there with Kenyon Drake there as well. I mean, they're both RB2s in my opinion, low-end RB2s, but they're both RB2s. They're still both startable at this point.
So we're at week 11 of the NFL season. Kenyon Drake last year was traded right after week 8. So that means week 15, 16, 17 obviously hadn't happened yet. And in those games, he ended up scoring 7 touchdowns over 3 games. That possibility, I wouldn't say it's totally gone. I wouldn't say it's still there for him, especially with the way Kyler Murray has broken out. But are you guys interested, especially Jack, you bring up those carry numbers that are still there, still double digits, in trading for Kenyon Drake last-minute deal on the off chance that he does a repeat performance of what he did in 2019?
I'm not opposed one bit to that because Kenyon Drake right now, his value is still extremely low. Really, really low value for Kenyon Drake. You can probably buy low. Obviously, don't give up too much for him at this point because, as we said, he's not getting in the end zone. He's not an RB1 like where he was drafted to be, and he's probably more of a low-end RB2 because Chase Edmonds is still there and he's not getting receptions. Kenyon Drake isn't. So don't give up too much for him. Would I give up a wide receiver too? Would I give up a T. Higgins for him? If I need a running back and I need a running back flyer and I'm strong at receiver, yeah, I think that's another doable trade for T. Higgins as well.
I would not give up T. Higgins to get Kenyon Drake at this point.
Oh, a man of little words, Lucas there. He would not trade Higgins for Drake. Can't blame him. I think Higgins is fantastic rest of the season. But it should be noted that I think Drake has the possibility of maintaining lead rusher there in Arizona. All right, moving on now to the next question that I asked. This involves one particular team over the course of the next two questions. We're gonna do the split ways. So the first part of this was, which wide receiver would you rather have for the rest of the season? I know which one Jack's gonna say. I know 100%. I bet my life savings I know what he's gonna say. Lucas, I know what you're probably gonna say too, and I have my own opinions as well. Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, Mike Evans. This had 128 votes on it. Looking at the percentages of what people said, Chris Godwin got 51.1% of the votes. Ran away with this one. Mike Evans came in second with 27.7% of the votes. And then coming in last was Antonio Brown with 21.3% of the votes. Which of these three guys has the better chance of being the Bucs' number one guy for the rest of the season?
And that's exactly the order that it should be in. Chris Godwin is the number one guy there still. I'm not concerned about that. He's the slot guy, which is, again, a type of receiver Tom Brady likes to target. You talk about his history with Julian Edelman, I believe Wes Welker when he played for the Patriots. I'm not super familiar with old-time football, so please don't hold it against me if for some reason that didn't happen. But I still like Chris Godwin. We haven't seen a lot of Chris Godwin and Tom Brady yet because Chris Godwin's been injured, but he's healthy. Mike Evans, I think, comes in second. Typically, this week I dropped him a little bit just because of the matchup there. He'll probably have to deal with Jalen Ramsey the most out of those guys. Antonio Brown, I just don't see it. I mean, he hasn't played football in, almost or over a year. He comes back. He was solid last week. He saw 8 targets. I think there's value for Antonio Brown to be had. I want to say that. Obviously, Antonio Brown is worth having on your team. I think this is a situation where you could have 3 productive wide receivers week in and week out, like you see with the Pittsburgh Steelers. If I were to rank them, though, Chris Godwin's number 1, or Mike Evans is number 2, Antonio Brown is number
1. Lucas, you say you're not familiar with old-time football, and by old-time football, you must mean the 2010s, because that's when Wes Welker played. That's also when Antonio Brown was by far the best wide receiver in fantasy football, and it wasn't even close. And Antonio Brown is still really, 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 really talented. And him and Tom Brady have a connection right now. He had 7 catches for 69 yards last week, and that was only his second game in a Tampa Bay Buccaneers uniform, and he didn't play over 40 snaps. Antonio Brown is playing limited snaps right now and is still putting up just as much fantasy production as Mike Evans. Maybe not as much as Chris Godwin yet, but once he starts getting more targets and more integrated into that offense, and he's playing more and more and more and more, and Tom Brady keeps looking for him, and now Jameis Winston is starting for the Saints, and the Bucs are creeping up on the division, and they have to go to studs who they know they can get the ball to. Not saying Chris Godwin and Mike Evans aren't studs, but suddenly you have to use every single weapon you have. Antonio Brown is one of the best weapons you have. If you showed it on Sunday, he's been really, really good for this Buccaneers team. He had 7 catches, once again, 69 yards last week. Those are really, really good numbers in your second game back for the second game playing with the team with those other weapons there. I'm loving Antonio Brown right now. I think Antonio Brown right now is the guy there, and he's the guy I'd want to own at this point.
I can't fault you for that. Listen, the numbers are starting to back up that argument. I still personally would side with the majority here and just go with Chris Godwin. I'd have Mike Evans in third, though. I think Mike Evans usually will draw the bigger corner, the best coverage cornerback that the other team has. So I think he'll be the one most likely to struggle to find consistency week in and week out in fantasy. But listen, Antonio Brown, he's given the opportunity. I think I saw the statistic from CBS recently that like since 2014, Antonio Brown still leads all active wide receivers in touchdowns with like 60 or something like it was a crazy number that even by taking a year and a half off, he still is the leading wide receiver in touchdowns. That's how good he has been. And again, we've mentioned it a few times. He still has that one game connection with Brady, but Brady wanted him in Tampa Bay. They have a fantastic schedule rest of season. I can imagine both Godwin and Brown being wide receiver twos. Like you can start them kind of like how you can start Boyd and Higgins. Like those could be the two guys. I think Evans will ultimately be the odd one out of those three.
I agree with you there, Shane. I mean, it's what it's looking like it's trending towards. I'm not going to say Mike Evans is going to be completely useless at this point. I think we're looking more like a Steelers scenario than a Cincinnati scenario, just because you have Tom Brady spreading the ball around. He knows how to use his weapons. They're going to get Mike Evans involved in that offense. So I think Mike Evans will still be playable. I'm not going to throw Mike Evans to the side yet. I think he'll be a solid flex play the rest of the year. Will he be much more than that? No, I don't think so.
All right, let's stick with Tampa Bay and go to the next question that I asked everyone, because this has been a hot button topic in fantasy football now for weeks, and people flip-flop every single week, and I wasn't shocked by this response. It was a little bit more overwhelming than I figured, but justified after the week that Ronald Jones just had. It was between him and Leonard Fournette, 630 votes. 79.6% of people said Ronald Jones, 20.4% of people said Leonard Fournette. Jones had a career day, rushing for almost 200 yards last week against Carolina. I don't know if he's going to be doing that consistently, especially with the amount of points that the Buccaneers just put up. I don't think they can do that consistently. But is it fair to say that Jones is the clear back to own over Fournette for the rest of the season?
Yes, I'm willing to say I was wrong on this one. Like I was willing to say I was wrong about Todd Gurley this season. For the most part, obviously, we're a little bit lower on Todd Gurley, but that's not the point. Ronald Jones, it's looking like if Ronald Jones isn't playing particularly well, if Leonard Fournette is playing better, it's going to be a 50-50 split. If Ronald Jones is playing well, it's his backfield. That's what it's starting to look like. Ronald Jones is the guy that I would want right now. I've thought that Leonard Fournette was going to be the one to take over. I think he's the more talented running back there. He's obviously had fewer mistakes than Ronald Jones this season by a lot. Ronald Jones has had a lot of drops, a lot of fumbles, including a fumble this past week early on in the game, and they still went with him, which kind of surprised me. But Ronald Jones for fantasy, if I'm going to own one, it's going to be him just because I think that he's going to have the better chance to more touches in that backfield week in and
I would rather have Ronald Jones at this point. I don't think the split is that significant. Leonard Fournette is still getting more receptions in that offense. Ronald Jones is getting more carries, but it's not necessarily by a ton. It seems to go back, as you said, with the hot hand approach. If Ronald Jones isn't producing, Leonard Fournette's going to come in, and Leonard Fournette's going to play, and Leonard Fournette has been producing as well. Both those guys have been producing in that offense. Are they both fantasy usable? I think Ronald Jones is a lot more fantasy useful at this point than Leonard Fournette is, and it's by a pretty wide margin. So I think Ronald Jones is definitely the back to own, but still I think there's a chance Leonard Fournette could once again take over depending on the hot hand approach just because he's gained a lot more reception.
I'm not ready to drop Leonard Fournette. Don't go out and don't drop Leonard Fournette after this. Of course, Leonard Fournette still, I think, has value, particularly on your bench at this point, just in case Ronald Jones goes down and he takes over, or he takes over just for whatever reason, or if you just need a fill-in 1 week for something, Leonard Fournette is still a usable running back. I just think Ronald Jones is for sure the guy to own.
I love reading the comments here on these tweets, because someone said right under this, based on my season, this will be the 1 week that Fournette has 200 yards, 3 touchdowns, and Jones disappears in the second half with only 5 carries and 40 yards. That's the way it literally could have looked last week, but it didn't. Bruce Arians surprised everyone, Lucas, as you mentioned, after that fumble. I was even shocked that Jones was given a second chance at that. But if Jones is this lead back in Tampa Bay, which has such a fantastic offense that we've seen, do we think that he could be an RB1 potentially if they fade Fournette enough out of the offense?
I mean, if they fade Fournette enough, sure, but I don't see that happening.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of with Lucas on this one. I don't see that happening either. Fournette's not going to be completely faded out of the offense ever. Will there be times when he's faded a little bit out? Yes. Ronald Jones has the potential for that. I don't think he actually gets there. I think we can safely say he's an RB2 the rest of the year, though.
All right, moving on now. We have this one surprised me a lot. Out of all the questions that we asked, I was most surprised by this one. This was the most recent one, so still not a ton of votes on it, only 600 exactly. For which wide receiver would you rather have for the rest of the season for the Minnesota Vikings between Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson? Majority of people, 52.3%, went with Justin Jefferson over Adam Thielen. I know Justin Jefferson just had a great game against the Chicago Bears, and so did Thielen. Thielen is easily the team's number one target when inside the red zone. Had those 2 touchdowns, won me the week. Thank you again, Adam Thielen. I can't thank you enough for that one. My love goes to you for the rest of my life. But still, I was surprised because we've never had Jefferson over Thielen in our rankings, and I don't know when that time will come. I think Thielen right now, for us at least, is in the top 10. Jefferson is top 20, but Thielen is still this team's number one, you'd have to think.
You know, you look at the targets, and it's actually kind of surprising. Thielen's target share over the last 4 weeks is 5, 4, 5, and 7. So it's not fantastic. You mentioned Shane. He's obviously getting the red zone looks, which is very good. But Jefferson over that same time, 11, 4, 4, and 10. Those 2 games of 4, obviously when Dalvin Cook was going off, Thielen was 4 and 5 for those 2 games. Jefferson is more boomer bust than Adam Thielen, in part because I do expect Thielen's target share to be higher more consistently. But Jefferson has been garnering a lot of targets recently. I also think Adam Thielen, like you said, is going to be better in the red zone like he has been. He's going to get more targets there. So that's why I would still go with Thielen over Jefferson. Jefferson, though, I do like Jefferson. He has been very good, and he's going to continue to be good fantasy-wise. I mean, he's an RB2 the rest of the
wide receiver too. But can you really say that Jefferson is a boomer bust when those targets are there? I think you could make the case that Thielen is more boomer bust because you're relying on the touchdowns.
When those targets are there, no. But that's the big thing is when. You look at his target share, I'll just go from week 1 down because I think this displays it perfectly. 3, 3, 9, 5, 5, 11, 4, 4, 10. You see, when the targets are there, he produces. However, half the time they're
Yeah, no, I'm just going to echo Lucas's point there. When talking about boomer bust, Adam Thielen has had 3 games this year where he scored single-digit fantasy points in PPR. Justin Jefferson has had 5 of those games in 9 weeks of played football because they had their bye in week 7, obviously entering week 11 here. So Justin Jefferson half the time is going to put up single-digit points. Half the time he's going to have a really, really good game. Adam Thielen on the other end, you can trust a little bit more. Maybe the ceiling's not as high. It's probably just as high. It's probably equally as high as Justin Jefferson, but he has a little bit more consistency to him, a little bit more rhythm because he's had that connection with Kirk Cousins. But once again, both those guys are pretty solid.
But the question is still there. Which one would you rather own for the rest of the season?
The answer is Thielen. I value consistency a lot more at this point, especially out of that wide receiver position that's been so boom or bust lately. I'll take.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, I'm looking at their matchups. The only matchup where there's really maybe much of a difference where I'd consider putting Jefferson above Thielen is Week 15 against Chicago again. Every other matchup that they have, I don't really think the teams have one really dominant cornerback. I mean, Tampa Bay's got Jamal Dean there, who's been solid, but I don't think has been good enough there to really make it, put Jefferson over Thielen. So I'd rather have.
Last poll that we're going to get to today. The Steelers have a fantastic problem. They have too many great wide receivers. Evident by this poll, it seems like everyone thinks that all these guys are very, very close in value, but the winner may shock you. For which of these wide receivers would you rather have for the rest of the season? Majority of the Brainiacs, 640 who voted, 37% said Chase Claypool, 35.9% said Deontay Johnson, and 27% said Juju Smith-Schuster. Now, I don't know if Juju's the lowest because people still have a sour taste in their mouths from earlier in the season when Juju was very disappointing, and they're still thinking that Claypool is this touchdown monster, that he's going to keep this up for the rest of the season. Personally, I think Deontay Johnson's the better wide receiver to own. I think he can do it all. I think he can have the monster week because we've seen that. I think he can get it done through the air with just yards because we saw that recently. I think he can get all the targets because we saw him lead the Steelers in targets a few weeks ago with 15 in one game. He would be my pick here, and then it would go Juju, and then it would go Claypool. I am really surprised that Claypool took this poll by the margin that he did.
I am too, Shane. I'm going to go Juju number one. And for one reason, and really in PPR, I should say, if we're talking standard, maybe it gets a little bit more jumbled. But I always assume PPR because that's the most standard format. Juju is who I'm going to take because it's very evident when you watch Steelers games that ever since those 3 weeks, weeks 3, 5, and 6, where he had 5 targets, and 4 targets, they've done everything they can to get the ball in Juju's hands as many times as possible. Since then, you're looking at 14 targets, 8 targets, 7 targets, 13 targets. Week in and week out, Claypool and Johnson have matched those target numbers at times, but not nearly as consistently as Juju has gotten them. And I mean, it shows if you watch the games, they try and get the ball to Juju as much as they possibly can, and it's been working. I mean, you look at his points over those weeks, 17.5, 13.7, 21.3, 22.7. He's the most consistent of those guys. Week in and week out, will he boom as high? No. Johnson and Claypool will probably boom higher. They're going to bust more often, and they're going to bust harder too.
Yeah, I'm going to echo everything Lucas just said again. Lucas, me and you are agreeing a lot today. I'm liking it.
Oh, except for, well, obviously, with the Tampa Bay backfield or wide receiver core. But, wow, that's...
Yeah, you're right. You were wrong on the Tampa Bay receiving core. But for the rest of the guys on the Steelers, I agree that it's Juju Smith-Schuster at this point. It's so close, though. So close. I'll go Juju. I'll go Deontay, and I think that's really tight. And then there's a little step down, not a big one, to Chase Claypool. I think Deontay Johnson, number 2, is a good spot for him. But it's so close. I really could go either way. I'll take Juju rest of the year if I have my choice, just because the target numbers are there consistently. But, it's a toss-up, honestly, with these guys. It's just so...
I agree with everything.
And that is extremely surprising. Wow. Those words, I don't think I've ever heard those words.
I know they
leaving your mouth.
they don't come often. But when they do, you know that it's right. So I'm gonna...
And you know that it probably means it's the end of our show. That's going to do it for us here today on the Fantasy Football Laboratory live on Locker Room. Obviously, if you guys have any other questions that we didn't get to, and of course, subscribe to our new YouTube page where we're posting all of these recorded episodes on Locker Room up right now, and some really other awesome content that we're doing. Thursday night sleeper predictions, Monday night sleeper predictions, a great Taysom Hill video that's up there right now that's convincing you why you should start him in your tight end position this week. But for the chemist, Jack McGrath, Spitfire Lucas Parrish, I am the King of Trade, Shane Palma. Have a great night.